Good evening, Rowan. It's the 4th of December 2015 and it's just before midnight, and I'm making you my usual Friday evening video to reassure you I'm not going to be seducing any priests over the weekend. And this evening I'm going to be commenting on a blockbuster of a lecture that you gave at the British Academy on the 1st of December 2015, and it's so mind-boggling. I'm really sorry that I wasn't there to arrest you on that occasion, but don't worry, there's still plenty of time and I know where you're going to be this week. I shall read out your schedule on Sunday evening probably, after a long weekend spent not seducing priests. Anyway, I'm going to make some quotations from this lecture, and there's one quotation from it that is so fantastic I'm even going to try and edit it into the video, but I might not do that till Sunday evening because there's quite a lot of quotations. Now, for a lot of the lecture you're talking about the work of somebody called Donald Mackinnon, who I believe was one of your lecturers when you were first at Cambridge in the 1970s, who you have quite an adoring attitude to. I don't know anything about him, but in light of the things that you say about people who I do know about, which are virtually always untrue or very misleading, I don't know if I've got any reason to believe that you're presenting this person any more accurately. And also you do tend to use your lectures for scoring political points as well, don't you? So I'm just going to comment on the things that you've said that he said with a more personal note, shall we say. So, without further ado, I'm going on now to start quoting from this lecture, and here's what you say. Understanding the tragic as that element of the moral world that consistently confronts you with the fact that you are making decisions in a world you have not made, so that even the most purely intentioned acts may have lethal consequences. Well, there you are then, Rowan. First of all, you never do anything wrong at all, you're just completely perfect. And now you're the one with good intentions, and it's just because of the sinful nature of the world that anything bad happens as a result of your actions. It's not just that you're a nasty, evil, spiteful little man who tries to crush anyone who makes you feel threatened and discredit anyone who might blow the whistle on you. It's not that, is it? No. It's that your pure intentions are corrupted by a sinful fallen world. Anyway, you go on to say, it should be clear from the examples that Mackinnon brings to bear that the horrors which may stem from good intentions, that's your emphasis by the way, the horrors which may stem from good intentions are as much personal and relational as they are public or social. Well, this was a great problem I always had in the Church of England, the prevailing doctrine of which seemed to me the doctrine of everyone means well. So you're never allowed to criticise anyone or judge anyone or complain that a pervert's trying to screw you, because everyone means well. This was the prevailing doctrine in the Church of England in my experience, as transmitted to me by clergy who I was associated with. Of course, everyone in the Church of England has good intentions, apart from me, who has bad intentions when I complain about the good-intentioned perverts sexually harassing me. So, the doctrine of everyone means well really never seemed to extend to me. I just can't understand it. Anyway, moving on. At the root of Mackinnon's concerns lie two basic truths. You emphasise that as well, by the way. The fact of human existence as necessarily limited. This is a world we have not made, and the fact of the irreversibility of time. We cannot call back yesterday. And these two things, of course, are connected. Our ignorance of the future, which entails ignorance of the effect of our actions, is the way in which most of us acutely experience the limits of our existence in a finite world. So what you're saying is, you make an action now, and because of the limits of time, we can't know how it's going to turn out, we can't know what effect it's going to have. Well, you know, one of the ways they evaluate development in children is how well aware they are of the consequences of their actions. People who are oblivious to the consequences of their actions are not very mature. Like, I'm talking about under 5 or something like that, do you know what I mean? Certainly, by the age of 7, a child would be expected to understand, to some degree at least, the consequences of their actions. So what you're telling me is that you, a 66-year-old man, doesn't understand the consequences of his actions. Is that what I'm supposed to believe? So what you're saying is you've got a developmental age of less than 5. Which I actually agree with. I think that's a good assessment of you. Really, your psychological and spiritual maturity is certainly very stunted. And in any case, I don't believe you. You know, I know what your actions were intending towards me. You were trying to break and destroy and discredit me. That's what you were intending. You didn't realise the consequences of your actions because you didn't realise you'd bitten off more than you could chew. That I'm not a cheap whore like you are, and I won't sell my soul for temporary gain. It's just ridiculous. I'm not doing it. So, you didn't understand the consequences of your actions because you thought you were going to break, destroy and discredit me, and actually it had the opposite effect. And you're so dumb, you just keep on digging yourself in even deeper. Anyway, in a finite world where distorted desire has taken such deep root, limitedness is regularly fleshed out in the gulf which opens between intention and result. So you're driving home the same point here, that your intentions are so pure, and it's all because of the sinful, fallen world that everything turns out so disastrously, and people are jumping off bridges left, right and centre in response to you. You do have a number of suicides in your wake, and let me tell you this, I worked in mental health from 1998 to 2010, and the only reason my employment was terminated was because of your scumbag behaviour. So, in that time I worked with people who were classified or labelled as having moderate to severe mental illness, and in that time, with all the countless clients I worked with for 12 years with moderate to severe mental illness, not a single one of my clients committed suicide while I was working with them. Now, you don't have that kind of exposure to such a number of people who might be experiencing severe distress and feeling hopeless, yet somehow everyone's jumping off bridges around you. Why would that be then? It's because you're such a toxic, spiteful person, and you'll do anything to destroy anyone who threatens you or who won't give you what you want. And if the person's a bit vulnerable already, too bad, there they go. Anyway, you say that McKinnon says that Jesus, as a human being, He must be familiar with an estrangement, with moral loss, just as he must be familiar with the uncontrollability of the effects of his choices and acts. I don't think your choices and acts are uncontrollable. They're not uncontrollable. You need to learn that certain consequences arise from certain actions, and you know that perfectly well. That's why you do so many evil things. It's to try and bully and abuse and manipulate people into giving you what you want, or to tip them over the edge if they won't do that. You go on to say, this leads McKinnon regularly into anguished reflection on how the acts and words of an innocent, that's your emphasis, a sinless person, then you leave a pause and you say Jesus. So you say how the acts and words of an innocent, a sinless person, Jesus, can nonetheless produce appallingly sin-laden consequence. Jesus says certain things that can be distorted into Christian anti-Semitism, for example. Well, the things that Jesus says that could be distorted into Christian anti-Semitism are the very strong statements he makes against corrupt political and religious leaders, corrupt religious leaders, hypocritical religious leaders, and because he was Jewish, they were Jewish, it was Jewish religious leaders he was talking about, because he was a Jew. If he'd belonged to another religion, he would have been talking about hypocritical and corrupt religious leaders in that religion. So Jesus was condemning hypocritical and corrupt religious leaders just like you. So we have to ignore all those statements just in case somebody wants to corrupt them into anti-Semitism. Oh, that's the reason we have to ignore them, is it? It's not because you don't want anyone condemning you by quoting the words that Jesus said about corrupt and hypocritical religious leaders. Jesus invites Judas. You're giving examples now of these sin-laden consequences. So the first one was about the things that Jesus said about corrupt and hypocritical religious leaders. And here is another example that you give. Jesus invites Judas to be a disciple in the knowledge that Judas is capable of betrayal. The acts of a sinless person have sin-laden consequences. Well, you know, Jesus invites Judas to be a disciple. Well, who did Judas betray? He betrayed Jesus. So, Jesus invites someone to be a disciple who he knows is capable of betrayal. And who does Judas betray? He betrays Jesus. So who pays the price of Judas's betrayal? Jesus pays it. So let's look at the actions you took in recruiting people to harass me and treat me in a vile way and so on. Which you had such good intentions, and it was just this sin-laden world and these other sinful people who corrupted your intentions, and that's why it all turned out so badly and in such an abusive way. It was nothing to do with you at all. Well, who paid the price of that? Was it you? No, it was me. So you recruited these people to treat me in an abusive way. And pretended to a lot of them that they were acting to help me. And who paid the price of that? I paid the price of that. So Jesus recruited Judas, and Jesus paid the price of that. And you recruited all these people, and I paid the price of that. Do you see the difference? And you don't understand the consequences of your actions because you thought it was all going to turn out terribly badly for me in the end. But you shot yourself in the foot. And who have you got to blame for that? Yourself. So, I'm going to leave it there for now because I think I've ranted on quite a lot. But I did want to read this letter before I go, about what happened when I wrote a letter to the vicar at the beginning of April 2004, complaining about his colleague, David Peat, sexually harassing me. So I wrote this letter explaining a lot of things that he'd done and the fact that he'd masturbated in front of me, and there was absolutely no inquiry. Now, I gave this letter to the vicar on the 14th of April 2004, and this is the reply that I got on the 22nd of April 2004. A week later, so you can see there was no investigation. He wasn't suspended pending an investigation. This is the response I got to a letter I wrote complaining about sexual harassment, him masturbating in front of me and him trying to coerce me into having sex with him. And this is the response. And it comes from you, Rowan, I'm not daft. It's supposed to come from the vicar in Headingley. It's not even on the headed notepaper of Headingley Vicarage. I know it didn't come from him. I knew when I got it, it didn't come from him. So this is what it says, 22nd of April 2004. Dear Rebecca, on Tuesday morning I told you I would send the Bishop a copy of your most recent letter of complaint about the Reverend Dr. David Peat, brackets 14th of April, and today I have done so. The accusations you make in your letter, nearly 4 years after the alleged events, cannot be substantiated as the only people present were you and Dr. Peat. As you know, he denies any impropriety towards you. I have said in the past that I consider your letters are about your perceptions of his behaviour. You appear to misconstrue behaviour and mannerisms that other people regard as normal. It has become evident that you have been speaking frequently and at length to members of St Michael's Church of your unsubstantiated allegations about Dr. Peat. 2 of those you cite as witnesses of alleged harassment have written to me to say they have seen no evidence of any harassment by Dr. Peat. By the way, those 2 people, I believe, were sexually involved with him. And they also wrote letters to discredit someone else who was applying for some ministry in the church. And he then followed her around asking if there was anything she'd like to talk to him about. So he was going to try it on with her as well. I am told you also make a point of speaking to newcomers to the church, warning them against him. This isn't true, actually. I never spoke to any newcomers to the church, warning them against him. He was quite obviously a complete lunatic and a scumbag. If newcomers to the church didn't want anything to do with him, he did that all by himself. You must stop making these defamatory accusations to other members of the church congregation. If you do not stop making these allegations, you may face legal action. He'd already sent me a letter a year before to try and shut me up, and that wasn't even because I said anything to anyone else. I confronted him to his face, and it tipped him over the edge. He flew into a rage, and then I got this alleged letter from a solicitor that looks like a forgery anyway. You must also stop making gestures at Dr. Peat during church services. This is because I put 2 fingers up at him when he was staring at me, because it was the only way to stop him. These actions and your conspicuously leaving the church while Dr. Peat is preaching are disturbing to other members of the congregation and damaging to the church. It was actually Dr. Peat's excuse of preaching, in which he often made suggestive remarks, stared at me, directed comments at me and maligned articles I wrote in the church magazine and the Bible study group that I was leading. So I didn't want to listen to his personal attacks on me. So for 18 months, every time he stood up to preach, I walked out of the church and stood in the porch until he'd finished. This included at midnight mass on Christmas Eve when it was absolutely freezing, but I'd still rather have stayed out there. And since I sat near the door, it didn't disturb anyone my leaving. I didn't do it in a conspicuous way, and I could see through the glass when he'd finished, so I just came back in when he'd stopped preaching, which was an excuse of preaching. He was talking, this is one of the things he said before I started leaving, that community was a big part of church life, and church members should be intermingling and interpenetrating. He's such a dirty bastard. I was 31 when I met him, and he was in his mid-60s and absolutely gorgeous. Anyway, this letter goes on to say, in view of your behaviour, I have no alternative but to say, do not in future attend morning prayer with me. I consider this a prudent precaution as no third party is present. This is Michael Cross writing this, the vicar, allegedly writing it, but it's actually written by you. And he considers it a prudent precaution not to meet with me on my own after he sexually assaulted me. Point 2. I will take responsibility for the reader's rota. You acknowledge that the current rota is substantially incorrect and this has caused confusion. The current rota wasn't substantially incorrect, and also since I always gave it to the vicar, Michael, who is the alleged author of this letter, to check before I distributed it, any errors in it were also his errors. There was in fact one mistake in it, which he didn't spot, I spotted and pointed it out to him later. So that's point 2. Point 3. I will not ask you to lead intercessions. Point 4. You should cease leading the monthly Bible study. 5. You should not write in the parish magazine. 6. You should cease to act as a side person. A side person is someone who hands out the books, takes the collection and counts the money. And point 7, you should arrange with the church wardens to hand over responsibility for the church website. So that's the 7 points. I regret having to take this action because you have made several positive contributions to the life of the church. In fact, I was running the church more than he was. He was completely useless. Since your perception is that Dr. Pete is harassing you and this perception is not borne out by other people, you should consider whether you might find it helpful in future to attend a church other than St Michael's. Well, I did. I'm attending the Catholic Church now. You don't seem to like that very much, do you? You should not attend services at St Michael's unless you are able to modify your behaviour. And then this is signed just with the first name of the vicar, although he obviously didn't write it because it's not even on the headed notepaper of the vicarage. And I would also say that your intention was that I capitulate at that. Well, I didn't, and I didn't leave St Michael's. I continued to go for a month after that, and I avoided times when David Pete was there and had nothing to do with him. And then a month later you had me thrown out of the church altogether because I hadn't capitulated at all this bullshit. You think I'm ever going to let this go, Rowan Williams, you complete and utter scumbag, you pathetic little man, well-intentioned my arse. You're off your rocker. You're a complete and utter psychopath, and you're still trying to squirm out of it like, oh, it was the sinful world that made all your actions turn out badly, which were also purely intentioned. You're completely crackers. You really are. There's no nice way of putting it. You're off the wall. You've flipped. You're gone. You're not sane if you think I'm gonna buy this bullshit. So, I'm going to be commenting further on that lecture on Sunday evening after a long weekend, not seducing priests, and I'll be reading out the letter that had me thrown out of St Michael's Church, which is even more bizarre than that one, believe it or not. You think I'm ever going to let this go? You've got to be kidding. Anyway, I better leave it there for now. I've been ranting on for about half an hour. It's a good job I've got new batteries, isn't it? And it's a good job that I extended my video time limit on YouTube. Probably take till the day after tomorrow to upload it on my internet connection. Anyway, I'll leave it there. But don't forget, I know where you're going to be, and I'm going to be reading out a list of your engagements on Sunday, and I am going to be turning up. There's still time before the end of the year, so don't forget. Be alert. Hasta el domingo.